The moment the moderator said, "We now welcome President Ibrahim Traoré," the entire energy in the room changed. Karoline Leavitt had just finished her strong speech at the Washington International Forum. Her voice clear and confident. "Let's be honest," she said, getting polite applause. "Without American aid, guidance, and military support, there would be no stability in West Africa. Without America, you are nothing." There was a pause, cameras zoomed in, eyebrows raised. It was the kind of bold line meant to shock or impress. Leavitt stood proudly, arms folded, waiting for a strong reaction, but she wasn't ready for what happened next. From the side of the stage, Traoré walked in, no teleprompter, no notes, just calm confidence and a focused stare. He walked slowly and purposefully. The applause was weak and unsure. Even American officials didn't know whether to clap or stay quiet. Leavitt didn't move, but her smile began to fade. Traoré took the mic, and though his voice wasn't loud, it grabbed the room. "You said, without America, we're nothing." He repeated slowly, as if tasting each word. "You said it like it was a fact, as if history began in Washington, and truth only speaks English." The room fell silent. "I do not speak today with hatred," he said. "I speak with memory, the memory of villages bombed in the name of democracy, the memory of gold taken in silence, the memory of presidents removed because they chose dignity over dependence." Then he turned and looked straight at Leavitt. "You call it aid, we call it control. You call it partnership, we call it pressure. And when we stand up on our own, when we refuse to bow, suddenly we're a problem." The room was completely still. Leavitt tried to smile, but her fingers were tightly gripping the podium. She gripped the edge of the podium. This wasn't the kind of fire she expected. "Let me be clear," Traoré said, louder now, his accent stronger and tone sharper. "We are not nothing. We are the reason you're interested. You need our minerals, our lands, our silence." Then he leaned forward and said, "Without Africa, your system would fall. Without our suffering, your success wouldn't exist. But we're done suffering quietly." Gasps and whispers followed. The American delegation looked at each other. This wasn't a debate anymore. It had turned into a confrontation, and no one had seen it coming. Karoline Leavitt wasn't one to back down easily. She had faced tough hearings, aggressive reporters, and angry crowds. But Traoré's words, sharp, deliberate, had shaken her, and everyone could see it. Still gripping the podium, she fired back. "Let's not act like this is about oppression. It's about leadership, American leadership. We don't take, we invest. We don't control, we protect." If the U.S. had walked away from Africa decades ago, there wouldn't even be a Burkina Faso standing on this stage today. The crowd reacted with mixed emotion. Some clapped, others sat back, arms crossed. Traoré smiled, but it wasn't warm. "You protect what benefits you," he said calmly. "You invest where you can take the most, and your memory, Miss Leavitt, is very selective." He stepped forward. "Let's talk about your so-called investments. U.S. military bases spread across African soil, not invited, but placed. Development loans that trap us in debt. Conditions hidden inside your aid. This isn't partnership. It's a leash." Leavitt's jaw tensed. Her advisors in the front row whispered nervously. This wasn't what they planned, and it wasn't a message they could easily clean up. But Traoré wasn't done. "When our leaders try to build African-led projects, you call them corrupt. When we reject your currency systems, we're labeled unstable. And when we want to manage our own resources, you warn the world about chaos." He turned to the audience now, his voice rising not just in the room, but echoing across screens, worldwide. "But there's one thing you can no longer silence. Our people know. They know who really benefits. They know who really profits. They know who keeps the lights shining in Paris, while Ouagadougou sits in darkness. They know who talks about freedom while quietly building walls of dependency." Leavitt tried to interrupt, but Traoré gently raised his hand. "You said we're nothing without America. I say you're scared of what we might become without you." Silence hit the room, not the kind that waits for applause, but the kind that means something deeper just happened. This was no longer politics. It was a live reckoning, somewhere in Washington. A hand was already reaching for the phone at the State Department. Backstage, the tension could be felt everywhere. Phones buzzed. Screens lit up with breaking headlines. "Traoré confronts Leavitt. Live. Burkina Faso president defies U.S. narrative. Leavitt under fire for your nothing remark. On stage, Karoline Leavitt adjusted her stance. The audience hadn't turned against her, but the energy had clearly shifted, and Traoré knew it. She cleared her throat and began cautiously, Mr. President, you speak of suffering and sovereignty. But what have you actually built? Burkina Faso's economy relies heavily on foreign aid. Your currency still connects to outside institutions. You talk about independence, so where's the proof? It was a classic Washington-style pivot, numbers, structure, logic. But Traoré didn't flinch. I'm not here to sell you success by your standards, he said, his voice now even deeper. You judge us by skyscrapers and stock markets. We judge ourselves by something you left behind. Dignity. The audience stirred again. Yes, we are building, he continued. We are building schools that teach truth, not colonial lies. We are building energy systems powered by our sun, and rivers, not your overpriced imports. We are building unity, not as client states, but as a continent learning how to stand again. Leavitt tried to speak, but he cut in. And your people, my people, are no longer fooled by polished speeches and so-called aid wrapped in disaster and soldiers. We've seen the kind of help that comes with boots on the ground. We've seen the support that ends in coups. He let those words hang in the air, sharp and unshaken. You say we are nothing without you. I say we're finally ready to lose your approval if it means gaining our freedom. A few claps began and the side rose, then more, spreading across the room like a wave. Karoline's expression tightened. She glanced around and saw the shift happening. Trying to regain control, she delivered her next line coldly. If you reject us, don't expect protection when your enemies come. That was at the moment the debate turned into a threat, and Traoré's reply would soon echo far beyond those walls. He didn't flinch. The threat was clear and deliberate. Don't expect protection. The words hung in the room like a silent alarm. Traoré tilted his head slightly, taking in the message, and then responded, not loudly, not hurriedly, but with sharp precision. Ah, he said quietly, there it is, the promise wrapped in a warning, the threat disguised as advice. Karoline's face stayed composed, but her eyes blinked faster now. This, Traoré continued, is exactly why we resist. Because every time we speak of standing on our own, someone in your position reminds us that independence has a cost, and that America decides what that cost will be. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The cameras zoomed in every word now, carried a weight far beyond the hall. You say we'll be alone, he said, turning to face the audience. But we've been alone before. When drought hit, we were alone. When disease spread, we were alone. When foreign-backed forces toppled our governments, we weren't just alone, we were betrayed. Karoline shifted again, but this time, she didn't speak. Traoré wasn't done. And yet we're still here, still standing, still rising. You call that weakness, I call it endurance. The moderator hesitated, his hand hovering over the timer, unsure whether to step in. Then Traoré's voice deepened, louder now, strong as thunder. You say you won't protect us? Let me be clear. We don't want your protection if it costs us our pride. We don't want your safety if it means silencing our voice. We'll face what comes without your shield, without your leash. The applause erupted, not the polite kind, but real and rising. Karoline's team at the front row tensed. One aide scribbled notes frantically. Another mouthed, cut the feed. But it was too late. The clip had already exploded online. It was trending on X, TikTok, YouTube. Traoré's fire had gone viral. And in that moment, Karoline realized this wasn't just a debate anymore. She had underestimated him, and he wasn't finished. She straightened up. Her team had briefed her on Traoré, defiant, unpredictable, good at making noise but not serious. But now she saw they were wrong. He wasn't here to stir the pot, he was here to change the conversation. And he was winning. She leaned into the mic, forcing a smile. President Traoré, she said, you speak passionately. But passion isn't policy. Emotion doesn't build roads. Rhetoric doesn't stop terrorism. You say you reject American protection, but your safety still depends on American satellites, American drones, American intelligence. She let those words settle, hoping to take back control. Traoré didn't even look at her. He looked straight at the audience. My security, he said, depends on what I choose to build, not on what you choose to rent to me." A murmur of approval spread. Leavitt blinked. "You offer security, but only if we follow your script," he went on. "The moment we choose our own path, your protection fades, the drones stop flying, your allies start whispering, and your media begins crafting stories of instability." The moderator carefully stepped in. "President Traoré, are you suggesting the U.S. deliberately withholds support to pressure African nations politically?" Traoré didn't hesitate. "I'm not suggesting it," he said. "I live it." Silence followed, heavier than before. "After we removed foreign troops," he added, "we were told we'd be isolated. But instead we discovered a strength we never knew we had. We had young engineers, local intelligence networks, and neighbors who helped us without strings attached. We started owning our struggle." Then Traoré looked directly at Leavitt again. "Do you know what a nation becomes when it learns to fight without expecting rescue?" he asked. "It becomes dangerous not to its people, but to those who thrived on its dependence." A few audience members stood, clapping slowly. Karoline clenched her jaw, fully aware the cameras were catching every twitch, every blink. She needed to regain control, and like many politicians, when the ground starts to shift, she forced a wide smile to wide and threw out a line she thought would shake him. "You speak of history," she said, "but it was America that saved Africa from itself." She had no idea what she'd just stepped into. The words hit like a slap, not just to Traoré, but across an entire continent. It was America that saved Africa from itself. Even the moderator looked stunned. No one clapped. No one moved. The line hadn't landed, it detonated. Traoré didn't react immediately. He stood still, not out of hesitation, but calculation. You could see it in his eyes. He had just been handed the moment he was waiting for. Slowly, he stepped away from the podium and walked to the center of the stage, like a man delivering a final verdict. "Saved," he repeated, his voice cold. "Now you say you saved us." Karoline didn't move. Her smile had vanished. "You dropped bombs on Libya, turning one of Africa's richest nations into a playground for warlords. You trained militias in the Sahel militias that burned our villages. You armed regimes that buried our dissenters in mass graves. And now you say you saved us?" He paused, not to calm down, but to let the silence sink in. "Saved us from what, Miss Leavitt?" he asked. "From sovereignty? From unity? From choosing leaders who didn't bow to Washington?" The mood in the room was shifting visibly and emotionally. Some gasped, some nodded, but no one was untouched. Traoré walked slowly toward Karoline's podium, not with anger, but with intention. "Let me tell you what Africa really needed saving from," he said. "We needed saving from debt traps dressed up as development, from trade deals written in D.C. and signed behind closed doors, from puppet governments trained not to serve their people but to serve yours." Then he turned to the audience again. "And we needed saving from the lie that we couldn't save ourselves this time." The applause was real, loud, long, and unmistakable. Karoline's jaw tightened. Her team in the front row whispered. Frantically, they were losing control, and they knew it. But Traoré wasn't finished. "You say America saved Africa, I say America stalled it." Then, facing her one final time, he said, "And now we're done being patient." The moderator quickly stepped in. "We'll take a short intermission before continuing this discussion." But no one moved. No one blinked. Because this was no longer just a clash between two leaders, it was a showdown between two worldviews. The break was meant to cool the fire. It didn't. Instead, the world took those 15 minutes and lit them up. Clips from the debate spread like wildfire. Traoré's line, "We don't want your protection if it costs us our pride," was already playing over trap beats in Nairobi, painted on protest signs in Accra, and trending in Paris under the hashtag Africa Answered. Backstage, Karoline Leavitt sat surrounded by her advisors. One suggested softening her tone. Another proposed pivoting to economic stats. A younger aide leaned in and whispered, "This might be out of our hands now." But she waved them off. Karoline wasn't planning to back down. When the lights came up and the stage reset, the atmosphere was different. The audience wasn't just watching anymore, they were choosing sides. Karoline stepped forward first, steady and measured. "Let me be very clear," she began, with all the control she could summon. "This is not an attack on Africa," Karoline began firmly. "It's a reminder that America has always extended a hand in support, in sacrifice, in solidarity." Traoré didn't interrupt. He stood still, arms crossed, letting her speak. She pressed on. "We've lost lives defending freedom. We've spent billions helping democratic transitions. When Ebola struck, it was American doctors who flew in. When famine hit, it was American ships that delivered grain. It was a strong recovery, patriotic, fact-based, confident." But Traoré let her words hang in the air for a moment, then walked slowly to the mic. "You flew in doctors," he said, "and we thank them truly. You delivered grain, and our people ate. But let me ask you something, Ms. Leavitt." He leaned in slightly. "When will you stop reminding us of your charity and start asking why we needed it in the first place?" The room shifted again. "We didn't ask for our healthcare systems to collapse, they did, under the weight of economic models imposed on us. We didn't ask for food shortages, they came after foreign companies, bought up our land and sold the harvest overseas." The moderator tried to move the conversation, but Traoré raised a hand gently. "America arrives with solutions, but never asks how the problems began. And we're tired of getting bandages for wounds you helped open." There were no insults, no shouting, just a cold, devastating truth. Karoline didn't respond because, for the first time in the debate, she didn't have a response. The tension in the room had changed into something deeper, irreversible. Karoline Leavitt, usually a master of messaging in Washington, now stood frozen. Her instincts honed for TV studios and press briefings hadn't prepared her for a crowd that no longer feared challenging the West. She wasn't just losing a debate anymore. She was witnessing the breaking point of an old script, one where global power was never questioned. And as for Traoré, he wasn't speaking to Karoline anymore. He was speaking to the world. Facing the cameras, he said clearly, "Understand this, Africa is not angry. Africa is awake." The room gasped. Phones lifted. Journalists leaned in. "For too long," he continued, "we were told what to think, what to trade, even what to believe about ourselves. Our heroes were rewritten. Our history was filtered. Our pride was called dangerous." He paused and then delivered the line that lit up headlines from Sao Paulo to Seoul. "We were colonized by empires, now we are colonized by expectations." Karoline opened her mouth to respond but stopped. There was no counter left. "Not to this," Traoré continued. "You asked what we've built, let me tell you. We are building a new generation that doesn't measure dignity in dollars. We are building alliances rooted in respect, not obedience. And we are building leaders who do not wait for Washington's permission to speak the truth." The applause now wasn't just loud, it was bold, defiant. And then, something unexpected. He turned back to Karoline, not with anger, but with a calm clarity. "I do not hate America," he said, "but I refuse to fear it." Silence returned. He let it stay. "I refuse to accept that partnership means silence, that respect means obedience, that being grateful means being quiet." Then, closing the distance between them slowly, he finished, "You said without America, we are nothing. But I say this, without our silence, your illusion ends, and it's ending now." Cameras flashed. Headlines were already being written. In that moment, Traoré didn't just win a debate, he delivered a declaration. Somewhere in a control room, a producer whispered, "Cut the feed." But it was too late. The world was already watching live. The debate, now unfiltered and streaming across every social platform, was being watched by millions. Hashtags like #LeavittExposed, #TraorésSpeaks, and #DECOLONIZE now trended in multiple languages. Karoline Leavitt stood frozen, not just stunned by Traoré, but by the global hunger for someone to say out loud what so many had only dared to whisper. Still, she wasn't ready to give in, not yet. When her voice returned, it was sharper, more controlled. "You speak like a revolutionary," she said, forcing composure. "But revolutions without strategy leave nations in ruin. I've seen what happens when leaders reject American guidance. They invite chaos, extremism, and economic collapse." She turned back to the audience, trying to reclaim them. "Africa needs vision, yes, but it also needs stability. And we've provided that. Traoré listened, then dismantled her defense with careful precision. Your definition of stability, he said, means a leader who signs your deals is stable, but one who demands fairness is radical. You don't fear chaos, you fear change. The crowd murmured in agreement. You speak of strategy, he continued. We have one. It begins by ending the lie that salvation comes from overseas. It grows when we understand that our worth is not in how useful we are to America, but in how free we are from it. His voice didn't rise in volume but in weight. We are not angry children rejecting help. We are rising nations rejecting chains disguised as contracts. At that, people stood, not all, but enough to shift the atmosphere completely. Karoline's smile returned, but now it was hollow. She looked to the moderator, the clock, her aides searching for a way to recover, but the room had moved on. Traoré stood still, almost calm, but behind his eyes burned the quiet fire of someone who had just broken something sacred, something unspoken, yet long enforced. Respect was no longer being asked for, it was being reclaimed. The moderator, visibly shaken, tried to redirect, but the moment was already bigger than the stage. The moderator tried to steer the conversation back toward diplomacy. Perhaps we can end on a note of mutual respect, he offered, some shared vision for cooperation. But the debate had already moved far beyond polite conclusions. This wasn't just a stage anymore, it had become a mirror. Traoré stepped forward one final time. I do not seek enemies, he said, but I also do not seek approval. His eyes met Karoline's, not with anger, but with a calm sense of closure. America believes it must lead the world. That belief isn't the problem. The problem is when leadership becomes an excuse to decide who matters and who doesn't. Then he turned back to the crowd. For decades, the world accepted a lie, that power equals virtue, that military bases bring peace, that debt creates development. But now, we are writing a new chapter. He paused and then delivered the words that would define the entire night. We are no longer asking to be respected. We are building a world where your respect is no longer required. Karoline didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. Her team rose first, signaling her quiet exit. No boos, no applause, just a heavy silence. A silent verdict not only on her, but on the very system she came to defend. Meanwhile, Traoré stood firm as reporters surged toward him, microphones reaching, cameras flashing. Young African students clapped with tears in their eyes. Ambassadors who once overlooked him now stood as he passed. It wasn't just a debate that Traoré had won, it was an entire power dynamic. He had shattered, that night, across global news channels. The story shifted from Leavitt confronts African leader to Africa speaks back. Traoré redefines the global conversation. The phrase that echoed across headlines was clear. Without silence, they're nothing. In capitals like Washington, London, and Paris, strategy rooms stayed lit late into the night, not for standard damage control, but to confront the question they had quietly feared for years. What happens when the world no longer needs America's permission to rise? Karoline Leavitt came to remind Traoré, who held the power, but he left reminding the world that they never needed it. In a system built on silence, one voice changed everything. She thought she was delivering a warning, but instead, she received one. In a room designed for control, Traoré didn't just speak, he broke the script. She said, without America, you're nothing. And he proved that without silence, they're no longer untouchable. This wasn't just a debate, it was the end of one world order and the beginning of another.